Unfortunately, we have to leave the lights on.
Okay.
That's good. People will not sleep.
Yeah, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to our seminar. It's a great pleasure for me actually to welcome Dr. Hava Siegelmann from University of Massachusetts. Dr. Siegelmann is on the Faculty of Computer Science and Neuroscience at University of Massachusetts. And she's the director of BINDS, Biologically Inspired Neural and Dynamical Systems. That's actually a wonderful name. And she's very well known in the area, of course, of computing and artificial intelligence and many things related to it. And she's also very well known for the introduction of the support vector clustering algorithm with I should say the one and only Vapnik, all right? And actually, she does a lot of very interesting stuff. Anything that has to do with man-machine, and it's just we just had lunch, and she just seduced me with everything she had to say. It was just incredible. And so, without further ado, it's a pleasure to have you here, and thank you. The floor is yours. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Hamid. It has been a great pleasure, and I'm sure it will continue the rest of the day. So I want to talk today about a work that started many years ago. So this is kind of almost history. We're almost closing a loop. And what I will be talking, can you hear me at the end? It's okay? Okay. So what I'll be talking is about what we call Super-Turing Computation. And I understand that the crowd here is more from electrical engineering. So what I'll ask you is if some of the terms are not clear, just ask me, because, you know, we kind of all do the same thing. We just call it different names many times, or just kind of take a little bit different angle. But I'm sure you understand the concept. So if something isn't clear, it will be very easy to answer. So please don't be embarrassed and raise your hand, okay? So I just put Francis here on the picture because last year we had 2 new results which are answering to his questions from 2004. Just happened. So I thought just to put him here. So in general, we think of the brain as some kind of information systems, and you can think of it in many ways, but it gets its input continuously and it thrives on input. So if you take the brain and put it in a closed bottle, I'm not sure exactly what it will do or not do. So it's all about accepting all the time input and doing something with them. Transfer to internal variables, which can be anywhere from membrane potential, changing of things. There are memories that are being stored, and then there are outputs. So in that sense, we can think about the brain as an information systems. Many times when we think of information systems, the way we understand what the information system does is by what functionality or by what processes we can see. And this is a smart thing to do also when we talk about the brain. And there are few functionality that we're very much used to have. One is inference. So inference is originally described in logic. So we say this is kind of a symbolic logic. You play chess, you deduce in a very simple way, very symbolic way. So this is inference. But we have also other things which are adaptation, which will not go anymore with the digital world. These are processes that makes us better fit where we are. So it can be the plasticity that keeps us alive, or it can be the plasticity of our understanding something better. So like during this talk, I hope you'll have some particular plasticity in your brain, and I will be making room for another piece of information. Okay, so this is not necessarily by symbolic logic, and then when you go out and you ask a question, you can say, well, since I heard that, and I knew that, I conclude that. Okay, this would be the symbolic logic, but first you needed the plasticity. The way that we think of how you do that is by learning, and learning is something that is a very general word. I did not want to put it as the first word, and here, even that learning we used to say very much, because learning is a very big thing. It has the inference and the inference training. It has the adaptation, so it has soft changes and large changes and associations. So all this is part of learning. Now, there are two particular processes that occur in brain, which enable these things. And I think they will tell us a lot about what kind of information system the brain is. So let me go to them in a little bit more detail. One of them is memory reconsolidation. And I talked with Dr. Snyder before about that. So what happened with the memory reconsolidation? It's the idea that when we have a new memory, we take it first time and put it in memory, okay? Like you have a variable and you first put value to the variable, okay? In computer science or in engineering, you use that you have a variable and it's pretty much there. If you really want, you can rewrite on that, okay? And then it will change that. Or if you think about circuit, maybe there will be some physical constraint and the memory will be fading a little bit. But we don't think about more changes than that. In brain, there is something different. This is called reconsolidation, a very interesting thing. What happened is that it was found in 2000 and was first found in 2000, and I think that the research in this topic are growing with years. You have memory that you consolidated. Now when you retrieve this memory to use it, to remember it, to express it, to write about it, this memory disappears. And now there is another process that is called reconsolidation, which call to that areas where the memory was distributed there. There is a new factors that are coming to the picture, and they restore this memory so that we don't lose it. The way that it was found is a story by itself, but we'll not go into it. But what is very interesting is that you take rats and you teach them things to do, and then as they retrieve their path, you give them some inhibitors for the particular enzymes which are related to the reconsolidation. So it's a very hard thing because consolidation and reconsolidation have many things in common. It's about putting the memory in, but reconsolidation requires some other things. It's about taking an area which seems to be moving kind of like unstable and putting things there in the moment that it's still unstable. So it requires a little bit more things. So if you take a rat, in the moment that the rat is doing what it has to do, you give these inhibitors, the rat forgets these roots, and he did it for days. Okay, so they started to say, well, in rats, how can we check it in people? Is it something that is only to animals? They started this simple experiment. The first one was in the Weizmann Institute in 2004 and 2005. But they took faces of people which were very clear faces and brought a group of students to the next day, showed them 30 people and said, you know, show which are the 4 people that you remember. Again, they did very well because these are very clear faces. And then they took one of the face and changed it a little bit every day, morphed it more and more towards another face. At the end of the experiment, people knew the other 4 images, and if you show them the original images, they did not recognize one of them, the same one that you tricked them. So the trick is that they did not add another memory, but they lost memory totally, which is very different than the field in neuroscience that people talk about unlearning. So in unlearning, you try to offer other options. The person has addiction problem. You show him that if he takes this drug, it will also give him a headache, vomit, whatever. So you try to create kind of new connection. You connect this yummy drug with these disgusting effects. Okay, but you actually, there is relapse. What is relapse? You didn't really ruin the previous connections. You just offer other options. This is what was known before. With reconsolidation, is very different. You actually take this memory, and if you inhibit it, it's not there. So it's something really weird. So why I think reconsolidation is so important, while all the research that is shown currently in the last 3 years, there are lots of Nature and Science that try to treat post-traumatic people. Anecdotally, there are papers, they took one pilot who was Vietnam. He wrote it at the same time they gave him something, no emotions anymore, kind of anecdotal stories. But what I think is interesting, usually we're not giving these inhibitors. So I don't think the system made it in order for us to stop memory and remove it. And also, I'm kind of a little bit vegetarian. I'm afraid to give these inhibitors. I mean, they may forget their mothers. I mean, who knows what will happen there. But I think that it's very interesting. We have this memory that not only there is one confabulation and you cannot maybe rely on witnesses that saw something because they had bias. You should not rely on memory because memory is not memory. Memory is a temporary storage until next retrieved. So with this, the word adaptivity, learning, and all these words are just, sure, what else will you do with this ability for reconsolidation. So when you do the local simulation of reconsolidation, you start getting very interesting things. The last few years I was working on reconsolidation, which brought me back to what I'll talk today. So I started saying, you know, I did something in the 90s. It was kind of popular. I left it because I thought that this is theory. And I love theory. I'm a theoretician. But there is some age in life that you want to do something that will change the world, and you do something that will help people. But then I came back because I kind of thought that maybe this will help the world. So that's what I want to talk with you today. The second one, which is also very unique for the brain, is the notion of selective attention. So the notion of selective attention, if you think about it, is genius. I would not be able to think about it myself, how else to do that. So we communicate with the world, and the world for all practical purposes is infinite or analog or whatever. And Chip gave today a good example over lunch. You say, you know, you see all these things, you know, you can go to details, you know, here and whatever, all the details that we want or don't want to have. And then at the end, you have to decide if you go through this door or through this door out. Okay, so we have all these, we have some model of the world around us, and we take from it only what we need. And now if you think about it, you know, I give a talk, and some of us that they give the talk, they don't even like to look at the audience, because some people, you know, don't like faces or whatever, so they look around or they kind of close it, so they're kind of seemingly looking, but they don't see anything. And now if somebody asks a question, then they want to see the face and to see if the question is positive or negative, and maybe even get closer. So we saw everything before in some way, but very efficiently. 2 beats for everything. Now I want to see 100 beats on the mouth and understand exactly how the question was said. So this ability of selectively attending and transferring the focus of the beats, this is a big thing. If you think, you know, information system that does that, I mean, I would pay a lot for my laptop to do something, even a little bit like that. So this is the enabling processes, and then we can ask the question. So we have this information system. There are all these processes. We can infer, we can adapt. We understand that there is reconsolidation, so understand memory is not what we thought until 10 years ago. Selective attention, there are some other things that happen there. Okay, it's really different. I can say that in selective attention, actually, we never work with 32 bits. So sometimes I work with 2 bits, and sometimes I work with 100 bits. And maybe in the long term, I won't, because most of the time I work with 2 bits. Okay, I work with 100 bits only once in a big while, so I saved a lot. That's a great thing. So what kind of computers are the brain? So some of us can write integrals. I guess in this department, more engineers can write some good mathematics than just the discrete mathematics that you see. And this is like a computer. That's great. So some of us are doing good things like computers. Some other of us, we just have this interesting ability to kind of look at a tree and know that it's tree, but still see a face. This is cool. Or kind of at the same time know that there is something, but see other options. This is a nice thing. So today's computer don't do such thing. I don't know if this is an important thing to do. I don't know if you will pay to have this ability on your laptop or not. But this is definitely an interesting type of information system. And if you want to compare what it can do, what the brain can do, I think that we have tools, and the tools are actually coming from computer science, or from before computer science existed, from electrical engineering and math, but now they're more focused in the computer science field. And the idea is maybe we can take the abilities that we have in the brain and match them into theories that we already know, and see what kind of automata the brain is. That's one idea. So I want to start with this idea as a suggestion. So all of you took Automata Theory. I'm not sure what classes are given in engineering. So Automata Theory is kind of like we have states. We think about states, and this is finite automaton. And we move from state to state when we get inputs. So this is the input, and then we move with A, and we move again with A, and when B, we stay here or here. And this is an accepting yes state. So like this one will have BA will say yes, and A will also say yes. So I think this one is giving us odd number of A's that will say yes. Okay, so this is kind of a little recognizer that does that. And in Automata Theory, we have all kinds of recognizers. So if we start here, and this is the final, this one will give us odd number of A and even number of B's. And the issue with a finite state automaton, it's this type of machine that every input it has to move state. If it didn't move state with the next input, it lost this input. So you either acted on it or it's not there. There is no way to store it. And this is a very interesting machine, and it was already introduced in the 40s when people were very excited about the little gadget that they had at the time, the close and open the light, and so 2 states, and then they had, a digital machine with 5 states. So this was really the coolest thing in the 40s. There are some things that trouble us when we get the technology a little bit more advanced. So, for example, if we have to decide in advance the number of states that we will have, and we just have A and B's on the input, and I ask you, I'm going to give you input. I'm not going to tell you which input because that's the trick. Give me an automata. I'll give you an input, which I don't tell you in advance which, because otherwise it's not fair. But I'll tell you what I want from you to do is to tell me if there are more A's or more B's in this sequence. Just compare the numbers of A's to numbers of B's. Not hard. But no finite automata can do it. You know why? Because you'll have, let's say, to count how many A's there are, and then to remove them every time when you get B. So if you give like zillion A's and then zillion B's, which is exactly equal, you'll not be able to count it. So there is no counting in that. So that's kind of what drove pretty much Alan Turing in 1936 to start saying, this is not enough to talk when we want to talk about something that will compute. We want something that will compute more. And what he suggested, the finite automata was still active in his time, and for a good reason. It's a very nice way of thinking of digital controller. And what Turing suggested is to add 2 things. And the reason that he suggested these 2 things is not because originally he did not think of the engineering application. Later he did. In the 40s he did. But in the 30s he was thinking about how to model a mathematician. And he said, what is a mathematician? A mathematician has to multiply 2 matrices. So he learned in school, this is non-creative mathematician. Okay, that's kind of what he had in mind. So he has to multiply matrices. He has an algorithm. Okay, told him to multiply this line with this column and to write it here. Okay, but what he does not want to force the mathematician is to do the 2 things that were forced on him with the finite automata. First, he does not want to force him to, oops, I don't know my password here. Okay. The first thing, he does not want it to be able to do anything in his head. He wants it to have some memory so he can write some notes, kind of what I have so far. But the most important thing, I think, for the Turing machine is that you don't have to run with time. It's not that you were given input, now you have to move. Okay, I was given input, fine. Give me 5 minutes, okay? I want to write, I want to think about it. Maybe if I'll think about the same thing 15 minutes, I'll come with a better answer, okay? So what Turing gave is the ability to take time and to say at the end, I'm done, and also to take memory. But the beauty of his work is that you don't just write and take time, but you have an algorithm. And you put 1 finger on the algorithm, or we call it read-write head, and you write what you want. And then when you're ready, you remember where you were in the program, which state you were. And you look at the state, and you look at what you have now in your notes. You can go back if you need. You see what's written in the notes and what state you are. And based on that, you can go to the next state. So it's a little bit richer than what we had in the finite automata. Now we can do things like, if you want to compare A's and B's, not a problem. I have this tape, A's as much as you want, back with B's to the other direction, not a problem. So this really started the world of computation, and Turing was the grad student of von Neumann. And von Neumann is known to the construction of the first computer. Turing is known for the construction of the first model, and this is the model that we have until today, because all computers are really based on that idea that we have the control device, we have a very good memory, very reliable memory, we have time and energy as we want, and then we calculate on that. And what was interesting, there was this Church thesis that by mistake is called Church-Turing thesis, and it's learned up till today in this name. I opened Turing's papers in the last few years, and I read that he actually said the opposite. So let's give it to Church, and later I'll tell you what actually Turing said. It's actually unbelievable that sometimes some of us read a paper and we want to find something, so we find it. And we just not notice that he say, however. Just read the next sentence, and oops. Like one could think, however. Okay, so Church suggested something very interesting. He suggested that any future computing machine will be no stronger than Turing Machine. This is a very strong statement. If you think everything you're going to build in your lab, not only laptop, every computing device that you're going to build, that you can build and put algorithms, there will be just like Turing Machine. So this is a very, very strong statement. And because of that, we want to ask, can the brain simulate finite automata? Can it simulate Turing Machine? So this is the first question. If Turing Machine is so desirable, I want my brain to do Turing Machine. Okay? But then I kind of have the other question, can Turing Machine simulate the brain? And I think that based on Church's thesis, maybe they say that it will simulate the brain if the brain is a computer. Or maybe it's not what the thesis say. Maybe the thesis actually said that everything that you will build, and maybe since I don't build the brain, I just get it ready. If I analyze it, maybe the Turing Machine cannot describe it. I don't know how strong we should understand the Church thesis, but these are interesting questions. So going back a little bit to history, Turing introduced the Turing Machine in 1936, and reading his work, he's the smartest computer scientist ever existed till now. I'm sure of that. Just amazing. In 1948, Turing writes a small note, just 5 pages. I'll show you part of it at the end of my talk, which somehow is not well published. And it appears in books, but somehow it's not the popular things that he said. So people know Turing test, like to compare to check whether a computer can be mistaken for a man. People know the Turing Machine, but there are some things that are not so much discussed. But he writes in 1948, he actually explained what's the problem with discrete digital machine, if you want to really talk about the brain. And I'll talk with you more about the end. But in general, he talks about that if you want to do something like a brain, he draw a little neural network and say maybe it starts randomly, and now the connection between them, which he called connection, have to train by term of inferences. So actually give us all these ideas that maybe one day we'll have a model that is based on neural network, which he didn't call it neural network, but he called it nodes that look like the neurons. And there is this training between them. And he talked about the difference between this machine, like the Turing Machine. He said it's information-based versus action-based. So everything is already there. And in 1993, embarrassingly, I did not read at the time Turing's papers. However, it's okay. We're still good friends because I'm very happy to see that we thought similarly. And I suggested a different model of computation that we call the Super-Turing theory. We had some papers and a book at the time, and there was like a little field created on Super-Turing theory, and also something that I did not intend to have, but happened, is a little philosophy field. They invite me yearly, and I always feel very weird to be with philosophers. They always ask me such strange questions that I don't even know how to process. But they talk about computation beyond the Turing limit. So currently, the Super-Turing is the only functioning model that is alternate to Turing computation. And I really thought that I invented it until a few years ago when I saw that Turing invented it. He just didn't write the equations. So he had it in the tip of his fingers, but then he died. So he died in 1953, and he had a very dramatic life in between 1948 and 1953. And he still works. He did some morphogenesis and some other things, but he didn't get quite to that. But the whole idea is neural network adaptation, all is there. Actions, looking at continuous input. Okay, so I just want to look at a little bit about the history of what people were doing with neural networks. So people from the 40s were talking about digital neurons. So they sum input, and then they had on and off. And I think many people really like these threshold devices because they're really cool. And in 1957, Frank Rosenblatt suggested an algorithm of how to train weights for one neuron. And in the 1980s, they suggested how to train models of feed-forward neurons, of more neurons, and then recurrent networks, and more. People are already asking in the 1980s of, can we get Turing Machine, which is our goal model with neural networks, and they suggested to take infinitely many neurons, connect them in a line, and then they will kind of simulate the tape. What's my problem with this proof? So the proof is right. You can take infinite many neurons and put them in a tape. The issue is that if you do that, you have infinite processing power. Notice what Turing did. Turing was smart. He took finite automata, where the processing power is. He took memory that has no processing power. You can write it, you can use it. He had a function that described how to move from state to state given the whatever you see under the finger in the tape. But he didn't give infinite power to that machine. In the moment we give infinite power, we give mathematical tautology. So this proof that showed Turing computation actually went and showed very easily. I did not even want to publish it in a good place. I just kind of put it on the internet. You actually get tautologies. You get infinite power. It's not very interesting. There is nothing about resource constraint. There is nothing about energy constraint. There is nothing really to say about it. So if you want to talk about Turing machine, we have to be fair and to talk about finite processing power. So the idea is that maybe instead of talking about discrete neurons, we'll talk about continuous neurons, like analog type of neurons. And there is actually a very easy trick that I'll show it to you very fast. So if we have the same input, so we have linear combination of other neurons and linear combination of inputs, and we'll sum it in, and then at the end, instead of putting the threshold function, we'll put another activation function. Actually, you can put many kinds of activation function. You can put any kinds of sigmoid, and I just put this one here for simplicity, but we can definitely take smooth functions. Okay, so this is kind of like the threshold function, except for here it's not the threshold. So what it actually tells us that if we have two values which are very close to each other, in the previous model, we can put the threshold here and discern them. So if you have two close values, we can discern them in the discrete neuron. We cannot discern them in a continuous neuron. So this kind of suggests to us that maybe we cannot do Turing computation, because Turing computation requires that we take two variables and we say, if this variable is greater than this variable, go to one place, otherwise go to another place. So Turing seems to require the ability to discern very clearly between them. And we put them all together. So we have kind of analog neurons with the general interconnection. And we call it analog recurrent neural network, just because the neurons are analog and the interconnection is recurrent. And memory here is interesting. It's here. So the memory is here and the processing power is here. So we have memory and processors are kind of put together. But as you remember, these neurons seem not to be able to fork, not to be able to discern between two close values, which seems to be a big problem for computer scientists, which make us believe that we cannot do even Turing computation in the brain. So maybe we need something else. So I'll tell you what the content of this talk will be. First, we show that they're equivalent to Turing machine, even if it's finite many neurons. Then we show that actually stronger than Turing machine. And what is interesting is that you don't get everything. You get a very well-defined class of what you can do with that. And this is actually a very important class. We call it analog P, because this is the class, as we believe and as we see over the last years, to be very relevant to analog computation in general, as opposed to the great Turing model for digital computation. Let me just focus on something. Then we'll see that the model that I show you first will be kind of easier to understand, but then we'll see a hole. In the moment that you cross the Turing model, you know, sometimes you just have to open the door once, and I cannot find any biological system that is Turing anymore. In the moment that you open it, everything became Super-Turing. So I want to show you why I think that everything is Super-Turing. I'll show you why I think the brain is Super-Turing. I think I'll show you maybe why I think cells and amoebas and any kinds that has this adaptivity and analog cannot be described anymore in Turing terminology. And reading 48, Turing has no problem with that, so we don't have to worry about his feeling. And we will end with talking about the Super-Turing thesis, which is a little bit funny. So, you know, the Church thesis, or the Church-Turing thesis as it's known, suggests that no computation device will be stronger than Turing machine. I understand it now as saying that no constructed digital computation and device will be stronger than Turing machine. And I think it's a good, the hypothesis is true. I mean, hypothesis by definition cannot be proved, but I think it's actually true. I have at least a strong feeling that it's true. And I suggest another hypothesis, and this hypothesis is about analog computation and about computation in nature. So we kind of put two things together, and we will suggest that in efficient time, computation in nature will be described by this particular model of the analog recurrent neural network. So we kind of give it a big role and say, this is a good model. It describes to us lots of things. Yeah.
How can you, I mean, if we assume a quantum physics type of model, then everything is done with not really an analog, but with a discrete number of states. So wouldn't you imagine that what's happening in the brain is actually digital?
No. So if you assume, so it depends where you go. So you could go and say that the world around us is finite because you have finite number of neurons, a finite number of bits, finite number of cells, finite number of atoms, and go there, and then the world around us is finite. And this is a fair view, and then you'll say that what you need is a finite automata, and everything will be there. What I will tell you that is true but not practical. For practical reasons, there was a reason to build the computer based on the notion of Turing machine. Because you have finite processing power, you don't want to have just finite automata. Because what you'll need is that, if you want to think about it, Turing machine is a finite automata on every moment, but it's unbounded. So you open it to as much as you need. If you will all the time work with the infinite ability of huge, unending finite automata, you will never finish any computation. So for practical reason, you went to Turing machine, and for practical reason, we will go to Super-Turing. So I'll kind of argue as I go that it is true the world is finite in some sense. It is also infinite in other senses. And for practical reasons, it is better for us when we build computer, when we build perhaps the next AI machine, is to think of it in a different way. Not to say that this is not true, what you said. Yes?
What about patronates? They are also for some tasks that we need infinite automata. Infinite patronate and it has some kind of memory.
Okay, so patronates are really cool. So what you have these tokens and they run around, and what you get with patronate, with some number of states, you get much larger automata. If you wanted to put it in finite automata terms, so you count the disks, whatever you call them, the tokens that you pass around in the states, and you get something that is exponentially larger, kind of multiplication larger than if you had only the finite state automata, which is a great way to condense automata. Turing machine is far more condensing. But this is a very good practical way to do that. And I love myself very much patronates. I think that if we were taking patronates and will adapt them, so now the tokens will be adaptive and the connection will be adaptive, we have a Super-Turing tool. So maybe you want to do it as a homework. It's not easy, but that's a good project. Okay, so just kind of what I will try to do, I don't want to get into the math. Actually, I want to get to the math, but I know that it's impolite, so I will not. But I'll just kind of wave a little bit, because I'm a mathematician. I think that the best part of the talk are the equations. But I know that some people don't share this view with me. So I'll kind of go softly around it. But what I do want to do is I want to explain to you in detail each and every statement. So even if you don't follow the proofs, you follow what exactly the statement is. Okay, so I don't want just to say neural net are Turing machine, neural nets are Super-Turing, neural net, I want to tell you what, under what condition, and why. Okay, so you remember that. And we talked about this plasticity in your brain. So that's the point. Okay. So neural nets and Turing machine. So how do you compare between a machine and a Turing machine? You need to have input and output because that's what a Turing machine does. So we have to have some channels. They have to be binary input because Turing machines start from some binary information on its tape. At the end, it puts 0 or 1. So it has to be finite input and answer. Okay, that's the word of Turing machine. It's true that in neural net that we don't really need to do it finite, and we don't even need to do it binary. But I'm going to constrain the family of neural network that I'm focusing only to those that can act this way, that they will give finite after some time, or not halt, or give the binary answer. Okay, so I'm focusing on some neural network that can be like Turing Machine, and then I'll ask what they can do. And this is just a reminder. This is the finite state automata that we said, the finite internal state. Then there is the Turing Machine, and we know that in the finite state, we cannot compare if there are more zeros and ones, and there are many, many others. And in the Turing Machine, we know that we cannot do the halting problem. So this is a classical problem. Given a description of a computer, description of a program, description of an input, will it halt on that? I don't know. If I knew, we will be able to debug things. Okay, there is no automatic debugger, no good automatic debugger. Okay, and also to say, just in Turing Machine, we look at the input size, and based on the input size, we say there is time constraints, space constraints, based on the input, and P is the class of functions of what we can do in efficient time, in polynomial time. That is very important. You know why? Because you remember in the finite automata, with every input, we move to the next state. With Turing Machine, we had time. We put the input and went to sleep, and the Turing Machine at the end rang a bell, and we woke up. We want to know if it took a day or zillion years. That's kind of tell us if it's relevant or not. And if it took polynomial number of steps in the length of the input, we say that it's good. Okay? So this is called the class P. And the theorem will say that, and the theorem is with Eduardo Sontag from Rutgers University. He's a great control theorist. And the theory says that every functions that are computable by Turing Machine are also computable by analog neural network. And the important point here, that the neural network that I'll give you that is like a Turing Machine will be like a universal Turing Machine. So it's not that if you compute longer time, you need more neurons. Okay, it's one fixed neural network with whatever 50 number of neurons will do to you Turing Machine. Okay, so you give me Turing Machine, I'll give you a neural network, and it doesn't matter how long it takes to compute, it's there. So I'll not go over the proof, I think, which I love, but I'll stop here for a moment, because there is one part that is coming from the proof that's actually very meaningful. And I'll tell you what this part is. What we want to do is we want to take bits and to simulate them as values, because nature compute with values, Turing Machine compute with bits. Okay, so when we go to neural network, we are going to compute with values. There are values of the neurons, and they flow, okay? And that's what happened. So we have to take all kinds of input, which we'll put kind of in a stack form, and think about it as a value. So we could take 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, if that was the input, and put it in base 2, and we'll get a number here. Okay, if you're comfortable with base 2, this will be a number a little bit more than half. But the problem is, in this case, we will not be able to discern if the first bit was 0, the first bit was 1, because we can have numbers very, very close to half. One is a little bit more, and one is a little bit less. And we have these issues that we cannot solve because we have continuous neurons. And that's actually the problem that I mentioned, that it seems like we cannot do Turing because of that. So there is a trick here. And I want to tell you the trick kind of directly. So in this talk, we go directly to the tricks. So the trick here is this. Instead of thinking in base 2, let's think in base 4. Okay? So I'm going to transfer 1 into 3 in base 4, 3 in base 4 3/4. I'm going to transfer 0 to 1 in base 4, which is quarter. Okay? So if the first bit was 1, I'll have a number that is in this region. If the first bit was 0, I'll have a number in this region. If there was no input, I'll be here. Okay? So the next bits in the input will restrict it more. So if I had 0 and 1 and 0, I'll be here in this range somewhere. And if I had 1 and 1, I'll be in this. What we get here is a self-similar structure. What I wrote here is the area that I'll be in. So if it started with 0 at the end, I'll start with quarter. And who knows what I have here, but I'll never go more than here. I just cannot. I cannot go, it started with 0.1 on base 4. I cannot go more than there. So this creates a structure like that. So when I will always be able to know whatever number here, I will always be able to say, is it more than here or less than here? And I don't need to know exactly value. I have a whole range. Nothing will be here. And I just ask if it's more or less than a very, very big question. And this is called Cantor's force set. And it doesn't really matter what set you have. What the issue will be, that we're going to take the input in bits and work on and create some kind of fractal. It could be Cantor force set or any fractal you have in mind. And fractal have this self-similarity and discreteness attached to it. So at every stage, it's very discrete, even if it looks like a mess first. So if you work on fractal with neural networks, we get Turing Machine. So that will be the statement here. With one neuron, we can discern if it was 0 or 1 at the top. We can put it all together, make simulation, and draw all kinds of conclusion about non-decidability of neural network comes from the non-decidability of the Turing machine. So what I said so far was that if we have neural network and the weights never change, and the weights are very small and clear, let's say I need just a group of 6 different weights. I need quarter and minus quarter and half and 2 and minus 1 and 0. Okay, I need a very small, easy set of weights. And if I use them and there is a non-learning, I'll get Turing machine if I work on fractals. So the question is, what happens if I don't work on fractals, but I want to work on the whole space? Or equivalently, what happens if instead of having fixed weights, I'm allowing to have continuous studying, continuous adaptation? Or what's happened if I start playing with coins? So the answer for all this will be that we're not anymore there. We jump above it. And this will be a very natural jump. But we'll never jump too much. We'll always be in the Super-Turing domain or in the analog P domain. And let me just kind of tell you what's here. So if we had, just to start with in a very simple model. So we'll start with a simple model that is not realistic, but then we'll see how it can become realistic. So this is just kind of to show the small differences. So if we have the same model like before, a linear combination, the same funny, easy function that I told you is not needed. You can put pretty much any function that start from 0 and go to 1, or almost in some monotonic increasing way. And we'll put real weights instead of rational weights. So the A, B, and C will be real numbers. I know you will start thinking where I have real numbers. I don't know where they have pi. I don't know where they have G. And I don't really know if there are real weights or not, but it wouldn't matter. So let's start saying that there are real weights, and later we'll say, OK, there are no real weights. Fine. I have other ways to get there. OK, start with real weights. So what's happened with real weights? I don't want to necessarily to show the proof, but I want to show you what is analog P. What is P? What is this Super-Turing? OK? So the Super-Turing is a very efficient computation class that have lots of power. I'll show you later that it does selective attention and reconsolidation and all kinds of very practical, efficient thing. But let me show you it from the mathematic point what it has. So what are these kind of functions? If you look again from the 0, 1 star, from finite 0, 1s to yes, no. So we can kind of say that every function, you rewrite all kinds of input by order, and then there's a table, and we write all the outputs, all this kind of input. OK, this is kind of a binary function, and we're still in this domain. Notice that we really could go much farther and talk about real numbers, or values, but we're not. We want to compare it still to automata. So just bear with me for the following game. I want you to have one game with me. So it goes like that. Let's say that you're a Turing machine. And I have input, and I give it to you. And you give me output after some time, which will be 0, 1. OK, so for every input I give you, will give you output. Let's say you are also a Turing machine. I'll give you, and you're maybe a different Turing machine, and you give me output after some time. Now I want to help you, because you kind of just came here and sat here and start asking you in front of everybody questions. It's not very pleasant. So what I'm going to give each of you, I'm going to give you a very smart advisor. And this smart advisor, in addition to the input, I'm the interrogator. I ask input, and the advisor gives you a hint in your ear about what to do with my input. OK? So that your Turing machine can take my input, the little advice that you got, and give an output. So let's say that for every input that I give, the advisor gives you 1 bit. So if the only thing you have to output is 1 bit, the advisor maybe just gave you the answer. OK, so I said this is an unfair model. I mean, it's fair, it's good for you, but I cannot really find anything with that. But let's say that the advisor is a little constrained, and what he does for every input that I give you for interrogation, the advisor gives you 1 bit, but not for every input, for all inputs of the same size. So if there's input of length n, there's 2 to the n inputs of that, and he can give you 1 bit. So if he told you first the 1 bit, and then I give you the same, I give you different input of the same length, and he says, sorry, I already gave you 1 answer for n bits. Now you have to be by yourself. OK, so it gives you a little bit advice, but not all. So this is more than Turing, if you are Turing, because he gave you something that you didn't know. But he didn't give you everything. So now I want to go to another thing. Now the advisor, instead of giving you 1 bit for all input of the same, of the length n, it gives you n square bits, or any polynomial number of bits for input of the same length. So it's better than 1, but it's not exponential. It's not 2 to the n option of input of length n. So it gives you various bits for advice, but not everything. This will happen to be the p-poly. This will happen to be the analog p, or the Super-Turing. Okay, so the Super-Turing will be equivalent to a very interesting machine, which is kind of like a Turing machine that gets an extra bits from somewhere, but I have to see from where. Maybe from learning, maybe from communication, maybe from randomness, maybe from all kinds of things that it has inside, but it will be able to take more bits and calculate more than Turing in this particular frame. As I showed you, the difference between here and here you knew the answer for everything. Here there is still very well-constrained model. There is an advisor, but this advisor does not give you a hint on everything. It gives you a hint on some things. So the theorem will be that analog neural network, the general model will be computationally equivalent to analog P, which also called P-poly. I'm not going to show you the proof. I'm going to show you one part of the proof that we need. One lemma that is very crucial for the proof and will be very crucial for the understanding of what Super-Turing is. And this is it's called linear precision suffices. So if some people are here physicists, they will feel very comfortable with this lemma. So what this lemma says, the lemma says the following. Let's say that you have a neural network with real numbers, with real weights, like infinite real weights. Okay, like really, like real pi with infinitely many things. And you compute something. I give you input and you give me output. Now, you have the same neural network, but at every time step, if you compute up to 10 hours, up to 10 steps, you have only the first 10 bits of the weights and only the first 10 bits in the neurons. After that, they're lost. Okay, so maybe after that there is noise. Maybe after that you just don't know. So what I will say that you that have your Turing machine or your neural network with unbounded real numbers in the weights and the neurons, infinite precision, and you that don't have infinite precision, you have just the number of bit precision in the description of the machine, like weights, and in the memory values, which are in the neurons, there is no way to actually discern when I give input-output between these two machines. So this is kind of weird first, because what I tell you, I just told you that you get continuity and you get Super-Turing. I tell you, you don't need continuity. What you need is something much simpler. What you need is not to have a bound. I want you to have this ability. So this ability that if you compute up to 10 steps, you need 10 bits. If it didn't work, I came to the room, I calculated everything with 2 bits. Now it was not enough. I'll try with 10 bits. If it's not enough, I'll try 20 bits, and I don't need more. And mathematically, this is equivalent to as if I was, in terms of input-output functionality, as if I had the information about the room with infinite. But knowledge about all your atoms, it will not help me more. I would still give the same output. So this is kind of weird thing. And I just want to summarize for us what we saw up to here. And do I have 10 more minutes, or that's it? 10 more minutes, OK. So I just want kind of to summarize what we have. Analog neural network are a very interesting parametric model of computation, if you care about computation in nature. If they're integer weights, kind of weights that are very miserable, then you get finite automata. If you have rational, simple rational weights on your neural net, you get Turing machine. And this is kind of a friend of mine who is a neurologist in Worcester, in UMass Worcester, told me that he has some patients which are Turing machine, which were kind of, their program was written before they came. So there was a fixed algorithm. And he asked them a question, they tell him the answer. He asked them the same question, and they answer him the same answer. And they repeat themselves, because they didn't really learn from what happened. OK, so they're really Turing machine. They have maybe infinite memory to remember his question, but they didn't learn. And then we have the general model, which is the analog P, which I say we can reach it not only with continuity, but with lack of bound, more than linear bound. Just to tell you that the physics equivalent to that is to say that in chaotic systems, you have exponential divergence. It's actually the same thing. What is exponential divergence? In number of bits, it's linear bit divergence. And what I say that we have linear bit divergence. So up to linear time, I need only this linearly many bits because I'm still in the space that I can handle. After that, I need more. Okay, so it's exactly the equivalent. In physics, they look at maybe of the half empty cup, and I'm looking at the half full cup. I'm still stable. They're already diverging. But we need exactly the same number of bits. And there is just kind of to explain, we actually have a whole hierarchy in which I talked only about the two extremes. So there is a whole hierarchy between rational and real, recursive and arbitrary, P and analog P. There is infinite hierarchy, smooth hierarchy, and we can find functions all over in between. And what I showed you is just the very end of that. And kind of a point to it, which I think maybe will help us understand it better, the jump from the finite automata to the Turing machine was by adding memory. By adding memory, we're never going to use in 10 steps more than 10 bits of memory in the Turing machine because we just don't have time to write more. Okay, so even if you write one of each, we'll just not write more. So we have this natural thing that even when we say infinite memory, we actually use as much memory bits as needed, which is not more than the computation time on Turing machine. Okay, so we can think of the Turing machine as a bunch of finite automata. At every step, it's finite, but with more something. Similarly, we can think about the neural network as an unbounded many Turing machine. At every step, I would say, this is a Turing machine. But this Turing machine changes and maybe grow and maybe become more complex. So maybe if we saw something, we can calculate it like particular Turing machine. If you have 2 more minutes, we'll calculate it better. If you give me more, I'll go to Super-Turing. Okay, so we have more. So this is kind of like a hierarchy that so actually at the end, to your question, everything will be finite automata. But this is a horrible finite automata. This is pretty good finite automata, and this is a wonderful finite automata. Just there is a way to think about it. So here we have this memory on the side, and here we have also the description of the machine and the memory that are really together. There is no way to discern them. Okay. So I just want to tell that, you know, these real weights are hard to digest, even if there is precision growing. So there are other ways to think about, there are actually many ways to get Super-Turing. So I'll tell you one. Think you have a Turing machine, and you have a coin, and you flip it, okay? So this flip of the coin gives you 0 or 1. You take this value and put it as part of your decision process. Okay, so if you have a fair coin, totally fair coin, like those that have only in computer science theory, then you'll have the class BPP, which is bounded polynomial time P. Okay, so it will be, you'll do something that will give you the class BPP. BPP is considered, it's a Turing, because, I mean, it is a Turing class, and we don't know if it's more than P or like P, but it's definitely on Turing, and we consider it to be the best, most practical computational class, and that's why we talk a lot about random algorithms now in grad school for us, first students. Now, what I would say is that you have a coin that is not fair anymore, but it has some real value there that bias to 0 or 1. I don't know what it is. What I'll tell you now is that it's Super-Turing. Now, the funny thing is that my Turing is Turing, okay, digital. The coin itself is digital, 0, 1. I mean, what else do I have? I have something. If I flip the coin many times, I can start estimating the first few bits of the coin. I get more info. Okay, I play with what I have. I start learning from myself. I get more of that, and I have more. I don't get analog P, but I get something along the hierarchy, and it has a nice name, BPP/pref log star. I don't know why I gave it such a horrible name. Okay, then is asynchronicity. People in neural network love to talk about synchronous network because we know what they do. They kind of all move together. But, you know, it's very not practical, and if you talk about the brain, it will take a long time to convince any neurologist about the synchrony of the brain. So if you move to asynchronous neural network, now every neuron has rate. They can be in a discrete time model, in a continuous model, and they will be like coin machines. So they also be Super-Turing. Just the fact that it become asynchronous. Rational numbers, few weights, asynchronicity gives you Super-Turing. The most practical model probably is a model that we just published last year with the Jeremy Cabeza. And this is the idea that what you need is really just the ability to adapt the weights. If you have a Turing machine or neural network, simple everything, but just the fact that you can change things, it gives you Super-Turing. There is another model, very interesting, that with the same postdoc, he's a smart one. He's really good. And here it's a really interesting model. So what he said is this. Every time when I talk with you about Super-Turing, I said that we have this input, which are 0, 1s, and then after time I have to give you 1 at the end. But what happened with the Turing model? Think about it. After every computation, I remove everything and start again. What's happened with memory? There was input, there was output. That's it. I forgot everything. I start my life again after every time. They say, no, let's have a model that gives output but remembers something from previous experience. And if we do that, a model that has continue to carry the information all the time, so it's never remove its memory, even wonderful memory. We go to another model that is called interactive. We can do interactive Turing machine. We can do interactive neural nets. And interactive neural nets are far, far better than interactive Turing machine. This is aleph 0, the number of interactive Turing machine. This is 2 to the aleph 0, the number of continuous of what analog neural net can do. This is the number of continuous function from 0, 1 to 0, 1, 2 to the aleph 0. So what the Turing machine in unbounded, without erasing its memory between, will do aleph 0. With neural network, will do 2 to the aleph 0. So we definitely have Super-Turing under any model that we can do. We also showed it in analog shift map, in various chaotic maps. And this brings us to suggest the thesis that perhaps any reasonable analog computer will have no more power than analog neural network. Again, to say this is a thesis, and this is me and Sontag and Eduardo Sontag. And this is really a thesis, so it's kind of questioning. But over the last time, I did not see something against it. And maybe just to finalize, I want to say that Super-Turing is very crucial for AI. And the reason that it's so crucial for AI, we know that robotics were promised to be important part of our life, and they're not. And there are all kinds of escorts robots. I don't want these robots in my home and not near my child. So recently, there was this great competition, and everybody saw how this IBM Watson won a series of Jeopardy games. And I can tell you that my department they watched it together, and everybody was excited. And I was there, and I was really not excited. I was thinking, wow, they have so much memory, so much expensive clusters, so much databases, so much clever programming of if then else. But the Watson still did what it was supposed to do. Ask it to tell a joke. And Super-Turing in the brain, I'm running out of time, so I'll just tell you that Super-Turing, the way I think about it these days, and the reason that I'm kind of going back to this research that I must have left at the end of the 90s, and there are people that continue all the years, and I appreciated them. I came to visit, to give keynotes, but I did not work in that. But the reason that I came back last year, I can say, is because I think that there is some inherent importance here. We have minimal precision. Okay, this network will work only with the precision that it needs. In cognitive psychology, we have the cognitive misers. We all cognitive misers. We only work in the minimal precision that is needed. Okay, we know how to pass classes in B and not in A. We will put just 5.5 hours and not 100 hours. Okay, we all kind of have these tricks all the time, and that's how we see, that's how we work. We have selective attention. What is it if not minimal precision? Flexibility and memory, reconsolidation. You take another system, it's flexible. If it's flexible, it's healthy. You take a person that is not flexible, even without being a neurologist or psychiatrist, we know that the person is not okay. We go memory and processing interleave, dynamic weighting of inputs. It kind of almost convinced me that there is something about Super-Turing that underlies cognition. But I want to go more than that and say maybe it goes to other laws of nature. Maybe it underlies organisms that have flexibility. Maybe cells, in the moment that they start losing the flexibility, we age and lose a little bit of the flexibility, the ability to learn in the skin. We start having the wrinkles. We start having things that are less flexible. We behave less flexibly, maybe. And at the end, we are less flexible. I want to finish that. You probably don't have very strong feelings, but people in computer science have very strong feeling. I have to tell you that years ago, I was really young at the time. I was in my 20s, and I gave a talk in Berkeley. And there is very famous computer scientist that stood and he said, I don't care what you have to say if your proofs are correct or not correct. Because I say, look at the math proof. Tell me where the mistake is. Because he said, I don't believe you. I said, check. This is the math proof. What's wrong? And I don't care. What I care is I'm a soldier in Turing's army. So I got over the years very strong feeling I've read Turing, and I'm the soldier in Turing army. He was talking about this kind of models that he wanted. So just to copy what he did in 36 is fine, but in 48, he describes that there are machines that are discrete versus machines that are continuous. He says this will work on configuration space, will be able to work on electrical things, and a continuous will have to be mathematics of manifold and perhaps even other more complicated functions, and will give more computational power than this. Then he was talking about machines that he called them controlling, which they deal with information only, and he said this machine will never have sex and will never do sport. And he said this machine that don't have the same input like us will never be able to be calculated and compared to us. And then he said, as opposed to them, there are active machines that the job is to change something in the physical world. I would like my machine to do that. I think that's what we try to do. So this is just a thank you for Turing for giving all this wonderful thing. And if I didn't read his 48 paper, I would not dare also to go back in the last 2 years and do that. And these are my colleagues that I talk about them, and I want to thank you all.
All right, we have a few minutes for questions.
I killed you.
Chip?
Give somebody some time. Somebody's got some questions.
No. First come, first served. Yeah.
Could you say a little bit about applications of analog computing for robotics? There's a lot of any applications that are coming up for implementing brain-like functions in robotics.
Yeah. So we work currently on 2 applications which are related to robotics. And one of them that I find most interesting is the view is Super-Turing of Reconsolidation. So in the moment we kind of made the connection that Reconsolidation is actually more than we thought. So Reconsolidation is explained in this paper as the ability to have something that you can chop away, or the ability to have something to change memory. But coming from the Super-Turing understanding, Reconsolidation is not about changing memory, it's about changing the machine. Because memory and the description of the machine is the same. And when memory changes, every time when I retrieve it, the machine has changed. So I may have Turing or not, but it's different now. So every time when I retrieve now, I have a new machine. So just by understanding this, and it's not kind of the classical, so if you talk with the people who do Reconsolidation in their clinic, they will not talk with you about machines and adapting the machine. They'll talk with you about changing memories. But coming from this point of view, we came with a few models. Actually, we have now the 3rd generation over the last 3 years of an algorithm that are to simulate memory that have this Reconsolidation property. And I'll not talk with you about the mathematic part, although, as I told you, it's the most interesting part of that. But what is interesting is think about that. You have an AI machine. Okay, you have a strategy, decision-making. And you have symbols. And based on the symbols, you look if these symbols, what the values are, and you put them together and you get answer, okay? And you make decision. Or you decide to walk forward, you decide to stop. Now, I'm taking your memory and I'm changing it so that your machine your algorithm doesn't realize it. It still retrieves the variable every time. But every time when it retrieves it, I do some reconsolidation there. So every time we retrieve it again, it may get another value in the same thing. Now, you didn't do it cognitively, wishingly. Okay, you just retrieve it, and now you retrieve it again. Okay, you retrieve it under some circumstances. Now you retrieve it again under other circumstances. These circumstances are crucially important in the robotic application because we take the environment and we update the memory where we touched based on what we are in the environment. Now what happened to this machine? You make different decisions on the same program that repeats many times. Otherwise, you'll have the same system. So it's like a Turing machine will multiply matrices. We cannot multiply matrices with robots because we don't have the same variable anymore. Okay? So I don't know if it's better or worse. Our machine is not reliable in the sense that we can multiply a huge matrix because at some point it will not be the same variable and who knows what I multiply. On the other hand, it's very adaptive. And the robot learns to do all kinds of things. So I tell you some of the things that we can do. So the robot can really track things that walk around it can really track things, not to the point that we say, go to the red and we put a movie on that. It actually, we show it something, and the reason that it tracks it is it saw it like this, then it saw like this. And it knows that it was there, so it understands it's the same. It just changed a little bit like the faces. Now it starts working after that, okay, if it has to keep distance. Another thing that we do with Super-Turing, which I really like in robotic, we call it abstractive learning. So what is abstractive learning? Let's say you know your teacher, and the teacher comes with new glasses and with new shirt. And it's not a huge deal for us, okay? It's a huge deal, actually, but for some of my friends, but not for engineering students. So we still recognize that it's the same person. We don't so much care about the fashion statement that was done here. Now, if we want to teach a robot to do something, like really teach it from scratch, I want to teach a robot that when I do here, like that, it's supposed to come here. Okay? If I do that and the robot try and it comes here, I can give him some reward. But he will still not learn what it means to come here. Now what I need to do is to stand on the other side of the room so that he will learn that the issue of the reward was not standing near this cup and on this table. After enough examples in the room and outside of the room, he will start seeing that there was something that was static there, and this was me. The way that we do it is by means of reconsolidation. We reconsolidate all the values, and we actually have this thing that in the memory that we see that all the other things changing and something stayed constant. And this thing that stayed constant, the sensors, that it was my face and the heat of getting close to me, whatever sensors there are, these are the constant, and that's the abstractive learning. So the abstractive learning that we do now with the robots, we actually teach them commands in all kinds of languages, and we kind of like to show it because we have, like most departments, we have every student come from another country, and we all talk to the robots in our own language, and they already know this, they know our language, and they just learn what we want from them, and it's very, very fast. So it doesn't matter what kind of reward-based learning. It's really not crucial. It's kind of almost waste of time to even do it better, because it's just the point of how by this means, by Super-Turing computation, by the adaptation, it can get from this abstractive learning. So these are the two main applications we currently do in robotics.
Any other questions? I have a question in terms of when you were talking about our ability to adapt, in a sense, to the environment or the activity in front of us with your with the resolution. How many bits you allocate to whatever information is out there? Would that be the same basically as, like, at least the model? Would that be like a neural network with many synapses, and then you basically select the
I think it will be a neural network that has all the time changing synapses and decides which synapses to get closer and farther. So it'll be stronger and more and less accurate, or weaker and more accurate. So I think that's what will happen. Saturated synapses don't learn. Synapses that are on halfway learn very fast. So we can change the synapses and let them, make them with more or less. So I think it is related to that. I think there is a very large flexibility in the way that we describe synapses, and we can play with them. I think this is one option of seeing it, and it's a good one. It's a good one. I think in general the way that kind of you think about it, that we have to have some proxies of the world outside, and we play with whatever we have inside. And maybe synapses is one, maybe chemicals is another thing. So I did not put chemicals openly in this model, but I think it's somewhere there too.
All right, if there are no more questions, let's thank our speaker again.